We discovered something that was a regulatory breach. That is like the worst thing, because I'm personally accountable to the FCA.
C-suite level is just that next stage up. Just that.
Being able to use sound judgment in that ambiguity, really, really key. Like, how do you influence when you don't necessarily have the authority? It was challenging. It was overwhelming. I shed some tears.
Welcome to Spotlight on Women in GRC, a podcast series counting down to the Women in GRC Awards 2026, happening on the 2nd of July. Backed by key headline sponsor CoreStream GRC, this series shines a light on the women shaping governance, risk and compliance, exploring their backgrounds, experiences and perspectives on what's changing across the industry. I'm your host, Lucy Montague, and today I'm joined by Grace. Hello, Grace.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. This should be a really interesting conversation. Grace, could you just start by giving us a high-level overview on your current role and what you do in your day-to-day?
Sure. So my name is Grace Suleyman. I'm the Chief Compliance Officer of an asset management company, and our clients are insurance companies. We basically service them. I oversee legal, company secretarial, enterprise risk, and compliance. So I wear multiple hats.
Yeah, you're very busy with that sort of scope.
Quite a lot going on, yeah. Not a lot of Netflix and chill time.
And can you give me kind of the background into how you got into this Chief Compliance Officer role?
Yeah, sure. So I've got a legal background. I went to law school, and when I finished, I started working at a number of law firms. I was at Linklaters for a while, which is a Magic Circle firm. And I did a few stints at different places, and I ended up at a US law firm, which is quite different culturally. And it was really good, learned a lot, but I wanted to go in-house because I wanted more variety of work, which is definitely what I got. And I also wanted better work-life balance, because when you're in a law firm, often, and it's transactional work, you're there late, sometimes weekends. And so, I just wanted a little bit more balance in my life and the variety. So I went in-house and I went to an investment bank. That was around 2011, if I remember correctly. And from there, I've just gone to a number of different asset managers. And I joined my current firm in 2019, just after my maternity leave. So essentially, I came back to work to a brand new role, and I've been
And
here ever
how,
since.
well, very good. And how does it compare in regards to that work-life balance moving specifically into GRC?
So I definitely think being in-house, has helped. Yes, it can be very, very busy at times. There are occasions you have to work late, but I'm able to balance my time much better. And, unless there's a crisis or there's a particular project that we're working on, then I'm able to, log off at a reasonable time and just have those like boundaries in place, which I think is really, really important.
Very healthy. We're then going to dive into the key question that we like to framework the podcast around. So women make up roughly 50% of entry-level roles in GRC, yet only 17% of chief risk officers and 14% of chief compliance officers are women. As a chief compliance officer, why do you think that gap is?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that the statistics are shocking, and it just shows how much more work needs to be done across the various industries and sectors, specifically in financial services. Um, Clearly more work needs to be done there. I would say that some of this might relate to how women view themselves, how they advocate for themselves, how they can demonstrate their impact and their influence. I think what would be really helpful for women to bear in mind is finding a sponsor. If you can find a sponsor in your organization to mentor you, to speak about you and the work that you do, the delivery that you've brought, that can be really, really helpful just to build up your sort of bank of credibility, and have someone, when you're not in the room, to speak really favorably about you. I think another thing is that women in general, we are more susceptible to a little bit of self-doubt, limiting beliefs. I think it's a well-known statistic that a woman will look at a job spec, and unless we can tick off 80, 90% of the requirements, we won't apply for a role. Whereas a man might look at 50% and say, yeah, I can do 50%. And they do apply for the role and they do go for it. So stretching yourself in that way, I think, is really, really key. Advocate for yourself, get your accomplishments front and center, speak very directly to your line manager about the work that you've done, where you want to go, and hopefully that will enable you to have those meaningful conversations to drive your progression forward in a really impactful way.
And is that how you got into your CCO role?
Partly. I mean, my specific role right now, I left because my predecessor exited the business. Initially, it was meant to be on a temporary basis. So he was going off on paternity leave, and I was meant to cover this role on an interim basis. It ended up that for reasons, to do with him and his family, he didn't come back to the business. And so I stayed in that role on a permanent basis. But he was very much a sponsor for me. He was advocating for me to the business, talking about my capabilities. And so that's what I mean about having someone who's like a real pillar there for you is so, so key. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity that I got, which ended up being a permanent role at this level.
That's so lovely. And when you got offered the role, just in the interim, how did you feel about it? Because obviously the C-suite level is just that next stage up. How did you think about that?
So it was quite a leap. And I think, in all honesty, I wasn't quite cognizant of what a leap it was in reality, what it looked like on paper, and then how I was expected to operate in practice. It was quite different. And so it was challenging at the beginning. I hadn't had any formal like leadership development training, anything like that. So I was very much learning as I go. And I think, if you are in a position to have help with that type of thing, you could then take the leap to a role with bigger responsibility, more seniority, much more smoothly. At this sort of level, my technical experience and knowledge was there, and it's assumed to be there at that level. And it's the softer skills that I think that's where some leadership training can come in really, really valuable. Like, how do you influence when you don't necessarily have the authority? How do you lead with empathy? How do you manage the relationships, particularly in risk and compliance? How do you manage that friction between the first line and the second line without damaging relationships? These are things that very rarely you're going to find in a textbook. And I think they're really, really important for organizations to develop their succession as part of their succession planning and their leadership development much, much earlier on.
Very good. So there's lots to unpack there and to think about. But one thing that I think is really lovely and key is the fact that you thought, God, this is a huge step up, but I'm going to go for it. I'm going to try. And that's that imposter syndrome that so many women have. And it's like sometimes you really have to lean into the uncomfortable moment.
Yeah, and I still suffer from imposter syndrome. It's got better. I found ways to manage it. But it is very much there. And whilst I was really grateful for the opportunity, it was also daunting. But sometimes I think you have to do things before you're ready for them. That's how we grow, that's how we develop. Otherwise, you're selling yourself short, and you're losing out on fantastic opportunities there are out there. What I have observed, particularly in risk and compliance, is there isn't necessarily a well-known sort of avenue to get that kind of like learning and development training. So I've been thinking about it, and now I want to offer like coaching and mentoring specifically for that, to help other professionals in this sector make that leap, to be able to get the more senior roles, and ultimately, if they want to reach the point that they're head of the function, or they're an SMF 16 or an SMF 4.
Women helping women. That's lovely.
I'll help men as well, but yes, because it's difficult. And if you don't have someone in your organization that can do that for you, then just awareness that there are other avenues to get you to where you want to be. And like I said, a lot of this are the softer skills, and some of that is learnt through experience. But if you can get a helping hand, then great.
Yeah, always good to be prepared. The next question I have here is, have you personally experienced any barriers or biases in your career, and how did you go about navigating them?
Oh, yes, yes. So one thing I will say is that everybody, whether they want to admit it or not, we're all susceptible to unconscious bias. Nobody is perfect. And in terms of the industry, I think we've come a really long way. I think there's a lot more awareness about bias. There's, industry-led initiatives that have been implemented since my early days in my career. So we're in a much better space. But to answer your question, yes, there have been times earlier in my career I was told, don't wear your hair curly because that doesn't look professional, or don't wear that colour eyeshadow because it's too bold, it's not corporate. I've also experienced instances where, my ethnicity, I'm an ethnic minority, I'm an Iranian, I'm a Muslim, and people often look at me and they don't know where to place me. And so it's become apparent, yes, I'm a Muslim, and the response I've got is, oh, but you don't wear hijab. How can you be a Muslim? And it's really quite shocking. Like I said, I do think we've come on a lot. There's been a lot of progression, but yes, there have definitely been instances of those bias, coming out with very overtly in those couple of examples. I've also had an experience where I was just, recently found out I was pregnant, and I was speaking to a HR person about that. And I was told, well, don't take more than 3 months off for maternity leave because that will be career suicide.
Wow.
Which is really disappointing to hear.
Yeah.
And when you are, less advanced, less sure and confident of yourself, I think comments like that can be so, so, so damaging. I mean, I didn't take that advice on board, but I think it's sad state of affairs that this type of commentary is out there, or at least was in my case, 7, 8 years ago.
And how did you manage all those different pieces of feedback, which are all problematic in various different ways? Like, how did you respond, and what would you advise to people listening to do if they find themselves in a similar situation?
Be bold, be confident in yourself, don't let someone second guess you in terms of you have a right to be there. You add value. You can contribute in fantastic ways to any organization. Don't let someone imply or tell you directly that you can't do that, whether that's because of the color of your skin or your gender or the length of time that you choose to be away to look after your children. It is difficult. It can be overwhelming, but ultimately come back to yourself and say, I'm listened to what you have to say, and I'm confident in my view and who I am as a person and what I can deliver. And I think, seeing other senior, in my case, women or, people of color achieve really, really high positions and do fantastically well is definitely encouraging. And so, look out to your network of who has done it, because that's all psychologically more enforcement that you can too.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. If a recent graduate asked you why they should consider a career in GRC, what would you tell them?
So I think the one thing I would specifically say about risk and compliance is the roles are so varied, right?
Yes.
The amount of work that you can do that touches pretty much probably all functions, all different areas of the business are really, really vast. I think there's a misunderstanding that like you're sort of sitting in the back office and you're very much in a silo. That is absolutely not the case and the reality of like working in a function like that, particularly in organizations that really value those roles because we want to partner with the business. We want to ultimately work with the business to achieve the business outcomes, be commercial. So you can get involved in probably every project that is going on, every initiative that is going on. Hopefully, the earlier the better. And so you get that experience across the business, you build relationships across the business, and there are so many transferable skills that you learn that you can then take to different organizations, whether that's in financial services or outside of financial services. So it can be really, really interesting and rewarding work in that way.
You're really selling it. I want to get involved.
Come on.
Yeah. Do you think women bring a different perspective to risk and compliance leadership? If so, how?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. Could be viewed as slightly sexist by saying that, but I think women are quite good at multitasking. We're really good at juggling different priorities, whether that's work priorities or home priorities, but you can bring that sort of, home priority juggling into the workplace. So we can definitely have a different perspective. I think also from a psychological perspective, sometimes women are more able to, demonstrate that emotional intelligence. For me, I think empathy is a really, really key skill and mindset to demonstrate. Understanding the frustrations that a CEO has versus the frustrations that someone like in the front office, in the investment team has. If you can hone into that and speak to them in a way that says, I understand, I appreciate XYZ is frustrating. Let's work this out together to get the outcome that you want in a way that's, safe for the business, which is ultimately the role of legal and compliance, risk and compliance. We want to protect the business from harm, but we obviously want to achieve those business outcomes. So I think some skills like that are really, really crucial that potentially women are more naturally sort of led that way. That can really help.
Okay, so engaging with stakeholders and getting them on board.
Yeah, and that relationship building and the emotional intelligence.
I love that. How can organisations do a better job of supporting women into leadership roles in GRC? So what have you found that's been particularly empowering or helpful for you?
Being open-minded.
Yeah.
And I mean that in the sense of like genuinely being open to diverse workplaces. Does a role really need someone to have had a degree, for example? Could they have come from a different background? Could they have come from a different sector and transferred those skills across to what your business needs? Diversity in terms of like gender, ethnicity. The more diverse an organization is, and I think there are a lot of statistics that back this up, the more impactful an organization can be. I think specifically for women, looking at flexibility, whether that's hybrid working, whether that's part-time working, that's really, really important. One thing I've seen in financial services is there is a real push to go back to the office more and more. I think COVID demonstrated to everybody there are different ways of working and they can work really well. So personally, I think it's a shame that some organizations seem to be very much focused on getting everyone back in the office 4, even 5 days a week. I don't think that's going to help in terms of diversity or women reaching more senior roles across the sector. And it could be barriers for other people as well. You could be a man who's got caregiving responsibilities, and an environment like that is not going to be helpful. And ultimately, I don't think it helps businesses in the long run. People might disagree with me.
No, I think that's a really valid point. What, for you personally, what's your kind of work, remote work versus going into the office schedule like?
We're very, very flexible here at my current workplace, which is unusual. And people are trusted, right? You're trusted to deliver, whether you're in the office or that you're working from home. I think people work harder. I think that they're more engaged by having that flexibility because it does work both ways. And so for us, it works really, really well. And that's what I mean about how I think it's a shame that some organizations are becoming more rigid and taking away some of that flexibility. Um,
Yeah.
because
It doesn't it doesn't build a trusting culture, as you say. It's like you've got to empower people. If they're delivering on the results, yeah, it
yeah,
should be up to the person.
I definitely think there's a lot of value for collaborating in the office, being together, team building. I also think that when you're more junior, you learn a hell of a lot from the people around
Yes.
you. So just
Mm.
like hearing someone next to you having a conversation that's not maybe directly relevant to your role or something that you're working on, you do pick up a lot of that. So I'm not saying that, everyone just work remotely and that's it. But I do think that flexibility is really, really important for encouraging new talent into the industry, particularly if you're a female and you have children or you have other responsibilities outside of work.
Mhm. That point. Was there a moment in your career when you had to take a leap in confidence or really back yourself? What did it look like?
Yeah, so this comes back to, my role stepping up into this leadership position. It was back in 2020. And what actually happened in my role is I effectively had to lead the team. So that was the legal and compliance team. And my title was changed so that I had regulatory obligations. I'm SMF 1617. That means I'm personally accountable to the FCA, and obviously I'm accountable to the firm. That was a massive leap, and I didn't get any training or development to make that jump. I said earlier on in our discussion, like I figured it out on my own. So yeah, I had to sort of take a leap of confidence in myself, back myself against imposter syndrome and the pressure to deliver at that level. But I did it, and others can do it as well. See if you have more, help along the way, it makes that journey smoother. But I've been doing it now for 6 years, so it's definitely got easier as I've gone along.
Very inspirational, Grace. Can you share a moment? Because obviously we spoke beforehand and you told me about a particular crisis, which I just found so interesting. During that crisis moment, what did you do and how did you pull through to get to the other side and look back and feel quite proud of the work that you'd done?
Yeah, so we discovered something that was a regulatory breach. And if you sit in my seat as an SMF 16, that is like the worst thing, right? It was a crisis in the sense that we absolutely wouldn't have wanted to find ourselves in that position, but we identified it quickly, we remediated it quickly. It was challenging. It was overwhelming. It was very stressful. I shed some tears. But ultimately, I'm proud of myself and the firm and the team for us all getting through it, delivering a really good outcome. We fixed it quickly. The FCA were happy, and ultimately there were no like negative repercussions for the firm, but it was extremely challenging. And at those times, you've really got to lean on like the resilience that you've built up over the years and your ability to look past like your belief that you're doubting yourself and, is this the right way to go about X and Y? Um,
Mhm.
it was a horrible period, but I learned so much from it. And it's left me even more resilient for like future challenges. Not that I want to, ever have to deal with a breach like that again, but the reality is that it may come up. And so I feel more equipped if something like that lands on my desk in the future.
So some strong lessons were learned.
Yes, absolutely. And a few
Yeah.
tears were shed.
I really appreciate you admitting to that because I think sometimes you see these really polished leaders and they come across and they're like, yeah, we've dealt with this, moving on. And it can make it quite hard for junior staff members to feel like they could ever be in that position because it just seems so polished. So when you were communicating to your team during the crisis, what sort of messaging were you using to help keep everyone's resiliency up, also feel like they were part of that journey?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. Look, at the end of the day, we're all human, right? Nobody's faultless, nobody's perfect. I was quite open with my team that like this is stressful, but what are the tools that we have to come together to support each other to get through this? Um, I think often in organizations there isn't a lot of talk about that. It's all about
Mm.
delivery, it's all about impact. But we are humans at the end of the day. And I think it's okay to say, I'm overwhelmed, I'm stressed, I'm worried. Um, and there's safety in numbers. If you share how you're feeling and you open up to your humility, you can then support each other through that. I mean, the team were fantastic, and I definitely leaned on them. But I think actually, as a senior leadership team, we all leaned on each other during that process, and it helped us on that journey to ultimately get a good outcome for the firm.
Teamwork makes the dream work. Very good. We'll then move into more of the day-to-day between your current team. So, crisis averted. In the kind of weeks and months recently, what frameworks, regulations, and initiatives have you been working on as a compliance team?
So yeah, we're always incredibly busy. There's always regulatory changes coming afoot. There's one that's been like recently put out there, where there are some changes to SMCR. So this is the accountability framework for individuals at regulated firms. And if you look at what the rules are in terms of how they're changing, they're lightening up.
Mm.
However, my perspective is that actually, whilst the FCA prescribes less, the onus is very much shifting to firms interpreting the rules and being able to demonstrate that their SMCR framework is actually more robust than it was historically. So, when a firm is evaluating who should we make an SMF or a certified person, I think there's increased ownership and onus on firms to make sure that evaluation is really thorough, robust, and you don't just do it once, you have to refresh that on an ongoing basis. They've also brought in, well, it's coming in September, is the non-financial misconduct rule. So, this is something that was typically very much something that sat with HR, and it's now coming into the regulatory framework. This covers things like bullying, discrimination, harassment, and it can be looked at in terms of your conduct outside of work. So
Mm.
that's quite new for us under this regulatory framework. Before, HR would have handled a matter like that and compliance wouldn't have been involved. And now it is. And it's like, we're navigating how to build that into our governance framework, so that it's actually really impactful and effective in reality and not a box ticking exercise.
Mm. Very good. Looking ahead, what do you think will define the next era of GRC with all these different changes, and how should leaders prepare for it?
So building on what I just said earlier, I think there's going to be a lot more onus on firms
Mm.
interpreting the rule books. I don't think the rule books will get more prescriptive. I think, if anything, they will be more and more on a principles basis. I mean, the FCA is a principles-led regulator. I just think we're going to see more of that. I'll give you an example. Like, everybody's talking about AI, right? How are we governing AI? How are we implementing AI? Well, the FCA have been very clear. They are not intending on giving the industry a new chapter of a rule book. They are asking firms to build their AI governance around existing frameworks and existing regulatory rules. And I think we're going to see more and more of this. And what's really, really, really key, in my opinion, is those GRC leaders being able to use sound judgment to apply these regulatory principles in that ambiguity. It's rare for things to be completely black and white. So it's a judgment call as to what is the fundamental regulatory principle? How does that apply to our business in our specific context, in the market that we operate, the customers that we serve, the risks that we have? And that's quite challenging. It's also really interesting, but being able to develop that judgment in ambiguity and that influence without authority, I think are really, really key. And strong performers in GRC, I think in the next 2, 5, 10 years, they can really hone in on these skills. They'll do really, really well and add a lot of value to their organizations.
What's interesting about that is obviously so many people answer the question of the future of GRC is AI, but what you're saying is essentially human judgment, instinct, gut feel. The thing that the machine can't replace will be what navigates you through that storm and helps you understand and decide what's right for the business and how do we justify it effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, AI's got its place. It can help with so
Yes.
many things, but where is that human in the loop? What are you telling the AI to do for you? If that isn't correct or on point, the output is not going to be as good. It could arguably be dangerous.
Yeah.
So absolutely, that human judgment, it can't go away. If anything, actually, it needs to strengthen to oversee all of the great work that AI can do for us. But it's got its place in the long run, absolutely, in my opinion.
I like that, Grace.
And
So
if I can
not
just add one thing as well, sorry, Lucy,
just.
if something is to go wrong, what are you going to say to your regulator? Oh, the AI, came out with this. Because the first question the regulator is going to say is who's overseeing the AI? Who is the accountable person in the business to make sure that your AI related outputs are actually accurate, effective? We can't get away from that. I think there's so much buzz at the moment about AI and it can be great, but from a governance perspective, we really, really need to make sure that the framework is set out so that there are accountable owners and everybody understands the risks.
Speaking of kind of human value and then ultimately the value of governance, risk and compliance, it's so hard to justify governance, risk and compliance from a results, ROI, value-based perspective. How do you go about justifying the value of compliance, enterprise risk and your role within the company?
Yeah, it's really challenging. I think one way you can frame it is, well, what didn't go wrong, and had it gone wrong, what would have been the cost to the business for that? Some of that is financial cost. A huge part of that is reputational damage and that cost there, right? The loss of trust of clients, customers, your reputation from a cost perspective, if something was to go wrong, you'd have to employ lawyers at law firms who are very expensive to help you, potentially consultants to come on board and help you navigate remediating that. And so it's a bit backward because if you haven't had a big problem and you haven't had to go down that route to fix something major, then it is really hard as a GRC leader to sort of say, oh, we've had a fantastic year. I've you know created so much value and I've done such a great job, and it's resulted in the fact that nothing's gone wrong. I think cultures are changing. I think the value of preventing big major issues and that reputational and financial damage, organizations are more cognizant of that. CEOs and boards are more cognizant of that, but I think there's more work that needs to be done. It is difficult, though, I think, for GRC leaders to, you know, articulate that value. I would love to hear how others are doing it in my position. Always
Yeah.
happy to learn.
I think it's also worth just leveraging the headlines because there seems to be incidences, risk events near enough every other week. And there'll always be something within your sector, and it's kind of like just going, this is happening to these guys and we're in the clear right
Yeah.
now. Touch wood.
And and it's awful for those firms, but it can serve as a good, like, lessons
Mhm.
learned for other firms. So
Yeah.
yeah, definitely paying attention to try and understand what those weaknesses were, whether it was their systems and controls. It's usually something like that. Can be really helpful, yeah, to try and prevent that happening in your organization.
Very good. As we draw to the end of the podcast, I wanted to ask about how your career has shaped who you are outside of work.
Yeah, so I think someone in my position, you've got to lead with integrity, honesty, transparency. Sometimes that means difficult conversations. And those skills, they impact your personal life as well. I think, leading with integrity and trust means for me, I'm a better wife, sister, daughter, friend, hopefully a good role model for, my son. I think also, leading like with that empathy, trying to understand where that person is, meet them where they are, speak in a language that acknowledges their frustrations or their worries or concerns. So you can, be a trusted person, someone for them to lean on, open up to, a problem shared as a problem halved, that kind of thing. So yeah, I definitely think there's some like overlap there as well. Just as I want to be a trusted pair of hands for the CEO or for my team, I absolutely want that in the rest of my life as well.
That's so nice. GRC can help with personal relationships. Yeah.
Well,
um,
maybe in the case of my son, I still say no too much, which, from a business perspective, business people don't want compliance saying no, but I think I do say no to my son when he wants too many snacks or screen time. So some work to be done there.
effective boundaries. I think that's a good thing. Are there any books, podcasts, or people who have had a meaningful impact on your career that you'd recommend to others?
Yeah, so I can think of a couple of books. A few years ago, I read Sheryl Sandberg's book called Lean In, and it's about, yeah, are you familiar with it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think I took so many sort of like nuggets from there about how for women, leadership is different, how you can excel in leadership is different. Another really good book is called How Women Rise, and it's the 12 habits that hold women back. I read that more recently, and that had some really good takeaways in it as well. So if anyone watching or listening to this hasn't checked out those two books, I think they would be really beneficial. Podcasts, they're not really sort of leadership ones, but I really like Mel Robbins. I think she just like has some incredible guests on there and actually her own outlook and her own journey is quite inspiring. So yeah, when I'm on my walks with my dog, quite often like listening to Mel Robbins and seeing what she's talking about in her episodes.
Her let them theory has just become so
Yeah,
helpful in my life. Yeah.
it's
I
fantastic.
yeah, I'm going to check out that book. So what was it called? The second book?
It's called How Women Rise, the 12
How Women
Habits That
Rise.
Hold Women Back.
Oh, very good. Thank you so much, Grace. This has been a really interesting conversation to hear from a Chief Compliance Officer like yourself, and what we should be doing if we want to rise up the ranks. So thank you so much.
Not at all. Thank you so much for having me.
Course. And for all of those listening, we hope to see you on the 2nd of July at the Women in GRC Awards. Until next time, thank you so much. Goodbye.